Retro Freaks 2 is a 2025 clearly sequel to Retro Freaks from 2022. And this is a kind of low-budget horror comedy. It feels like it's what would have happened if Kevin Smith from, Geekdom had directed Clerks, but was kind of more inspired by Scream. So, this one doesn't star anyone I know. It's just a kind of a bunch of facially haired baseball cap wearing Americans that I'm presuming are part of this kind of collectible toy online community. There seems to be a lot of kind of influencers and stuff in this movie. And it does very much follow on from the original, which I have not seen, to be honest. So I'm only coming at this purely from the perspective of a film on its own merits, not looking at the sequel, and also not knowing any of these kind of people involved, or not really being that familiar with the kind of the retro toy community or personalities that appear to be in this movie. So this movie takes place a year or so after the original film, when there was apparently some type of demonic entity which killed a bunch of people involved in the kind of the retail section of this toy collecting kind of community in Texas. And now we have this masked killer in the kind of the vein of Ghostface, which they actually reference killing a bunch more people that are kind of involved in working in these kind of comic shops and, geek kind of type shops and things like that. And it's up to this kind of motley crew of protagonists to try and figure out what's going on and put an end to it all. So what will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's discuss what works in this movie's favour. And we do have to bear in mind this is clearly a very low budget movie. That being said, I actually think the movie's constructed on a technical level relatively well. It's actually kind of quite well shot, and you can kind of tell the low budget in the performances and things like this. But I will say on a technical level, at the very least, I do think it's actually kind of fairly well put together. Certainly shot very well and things like that. There's maybe too many kind of edits where it's having a title and stuff, but outside of that, I do think it's it's proficiently made, at least on that, as I say, at kind of a technical level. Things like cinematography, camera placement, audio mixing, things like that. It feels like it's kind of relatively kind of well put together on that that level. I would say if you are interested in this kind of toy collecting and you are familiar with these people, these influencers, then this is clearly who this movie is made for. It is. I do feel it's made for a very, very specific audience, because I think the movie assumes you know who these people are. It does feel like it's made for a very small audience, I have to say. But if you are part of that audience, I think you'd probably appreciate this film, as it appears to be very geared towards you. There are a couple of kind of references to sort of the collecting culture and things like this, and how these guys know their stuff and everything like that, and we kind of get a look in a lot of these sort of geek shops and their merchandise and all the rest of it. So you'll appreciate it if you are a fan of that sort of those influences. Basically, it does feel very catered to you. And it is very reminiscent of like Kevin Smith's Clerks, as I've said. It almost feels a little bit too derivative of it, I have to say, maybe a bit too much influenced by it. But if you are a fan of Clerks and you like that sort of off-kilter geek-based humour, again, you might find that you might enjoy this. And as I say, there's definite influences from the Scream movies as well. Now, they themselves were sort of somewhat kind of self-referential, so you can kind of see the marriage of those two sort of properties actually kind of working quite well. It appears that, I haven't seen the original, as I say, but it appears that this is more of a slasher type film than the demonic possession movie that was the original. So this kind of has those kind of slasher elements here. There's nothing too sort of high tech in regards to the kind of VFX, but we have a kind of a somewhat kind of fun looking killer, very much like kind of Ghostface, almost like a Temu version of Ghostface, you might say. But you know, it's kind of quite sort of fun, and as I said, it very much links into the first one. So if you have seen that one, it's very much taking kind of a sort of continuation. And the movie had this kind of light, sort of goofy tone. So again, it's very much a horror comedy. You know, again, comedy is subjective, so the jokes aren't going to appeal to everyone. But it's never a sort of out there humour. It's just kind of somewhat kind of a light film, and kind of a light touch in regards to its tone and things like that. So you kind of might get on with this kind of like this sort of this goofy fun sort of tone that it's trying to kind of put out there. Okay, so let's talk about what doesn't work in this movie. I have to say, I think this movie is very inaccessible if you A, haven't seen the original movie, and B, aren't familiar with these people, because it really doesn't try to introduce anyone new into this kind of world and stuff. It very much assumes you are going to know these kind of influencers and, you know, social media personalities and things like that. I'm presuming that they all have kind of like TikTok or YouTube channels and stuff, and you know, it feels, from someone who is not familiar with that and only looking at this from the kind of perspective of a film going in cold, you know, it's very much an inside baseball sort of style movie. So if you're not familiar, you'll find yourself not really being drawn in as a kind of a new viewer to this. I think it would have behooved the movie to try and be a bit more sort of trying to expand its audience to a degree, and not sort of seemingly cater specifically to the people who are familiar with these kind of guys. And you know, I have to say, it all seems to be based around Texas, and these kind of all these people that are in the film seem to be from that area. So again, you're talking about the kind of the retro toy collecting community in Texas, and presumably a few online and stuff. But again, it feels like a very, very small movie in regards to where it's kind of like trying to kind of target its audience. And again, I think the movie could have been, you know, tried to be a bit further afield, like Clerks was. I mean, this is the difference between a movie like this and Clerks. I think with the movie Clerks, even though again that was a very low budget movie, you didn't feel like you had to know the characters. It kind of brought you into these kind of characters, and you kind of got to know them in that movie Clerks. But this one, it doesn't. The movie doesn't do any work to try and ingratiate you into knowing these kind of characters as separate sort of entities. It just assumes you're a fan of the first movie or you're familiar with them online, and doesn't do anything to try and bring any new viewers in. And I think the decision here, and again, I'm presuming these people in this movie are all sort of not actors by trade, because the acting is a little bit rough, it must be said. The dialogue is quite sort of trite at times, and doesn't feel particularly kind of natural. Now, I appreciate this is a kind of a comedy, and they're trying to kind of, you know, play off their online personas, one presumes. But nonetheless, I've got to say, I think you know, if again, someone who is not sort of familiar with them, the dialogue seems very forced at times. And again, I think it's trying to be a lot of inside baseball, a lot of kind of like references to things that maybe that they've done on their online channels and stuff. But for someone coming in cold, it absolutely kind of feels very stilted and sort of forced at times. Some of this kind of like the dialogue and the delivery of the dialogue again. The movie's plot seems again very tied to the first. If you haven't seen the first, you know, it's difficult to kind of really get involved in this one. You can get the gist of it, but I have to say again that the narrative is quite weak. The movie's sort of plot just seems kind of somewhat convoluted, and a lot of times it just is more interested in sort of having these kind of characters do like amusing skits. It's also one of these films that appears to have lots of kind of online backers, and they've been rewarded through having these kind of like sort of cameos on screen, you know, like on a you know, like a over Zoom or something. And I get it, that's fun for people who you know contribute to the movie's, you know, crowdfunding campaign and all the rest of it. But when you're watching this, I always think when these things are kind of somewhat overdone, it sort of feels, you know, forced in there a lot of the time, and you just feel like this movie really spins its wheels in respect to that. You just feel like you're sort of spending these kind of like time with loads of different people. It just has these kind of loads of kind of different sort of people in different shops. And think, who's this guy? no idea. And the actual narrative here is really kind of loose, and it just kind of like flits from one kind of shot to another without ever really kind of doing anything to sort of bring you along for the ride. There's like a subplot with this kind of guy who's giving out this sort of holy water, and again, I didn't know what that was all about. It just seemed to be this random thing, and then it doesn't really go anywhere. And I'm just like, okay. So this movie seems like, as I say, technically fairly well put together. Narratively, though, I think it's all over the place. It's just not particularly interesting. Certainly for someone who's coming into this movie cold, maybe it's more fun for this, I presume, relatively small audience that it's kind of aiming for. You know, the actual kind of horror elements here are relatively light. It's just kind of somewhat of a weak kind of like killer and stuff. There's a little bit too much banal sort of dialogue, you know, through these sort of, again, multitude of characters, some of whom just going to turn up, and I think we as a viewer are just supposed to go, oh, it's this guy. But again, it just assumes you are familiar with these people. Yeah, so again, maybe it would have been better to have actual actors and have more of a plot, rather than just kind of relying on sort of people assuming that you know who these personalities are, and playing off of those online personas a little bit. But this is really what this movie feels like it is. It's a variety of scenes that are loosely kind of stitched together, showing you all these kind of toy collecting enthusiasts from Texas with a kind of a bearish sort of, you know, loose kind of narrative kind of connecting it all. And even then, when we do have our horror scenes, it sort of feels too derivative of Scream. It feels too, you can be influenced, but it almost feels like it's just kind of like ripping it off to a degree. And but more so of Clerks, it feels like this movie has seen Clerks and goes, we'll do that, but with toy collecting. Doesn't really feel like, it feels like it has very much ideas of its own. So, how to kind of rate this movie? If you are one of these kind of toy collecting enthusiasts from that community, I suspect you'll probably like this movie, because it's very much sort of aimed at you, and you specifically. For if you're like me and you're just judging this as a kind of a horror comedy on its own, without any kind of connection to these kind of personalities, it's a hard film to sort of really get into, because it's way too inside baseball. It's too much time kind of like with a variety of characters who you, the movie assumes you know and you don't, with the barest minimum of actual kind of like narrative plot and things like that. So for me, it's a 4 out of 10. I think it's a below average film, but for certain people, I feel that, you know, you may well kind of get on with it and kind of like it a little bit more. But overall, I have to say, I was kind of looking forward to when this movie ended, so I could kind of get on and do this and be over and done with. 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.